entrepreneurs. Get ready to stop dreaming and start doing. Here, ideas become action. We prioritize purpose and profit. You ready? Let's go. All right. Welcome, Emily Taylor, to the Purpose and Profit Club podcast. I'm so excited to have you here today.
Excellent. Yeah, I'm excited to be here.
So I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Tell us a bit about what you do. And I want to know also how you came up with your business name, because I love it. I love even the way that it's lowercase and uppercase. So you're the principal at teenyBIG. So tell us all about that, the work you do.
Sure. So at teenyBIG, I focus on strategic listening for nonprofits. And just in other words, what that is qualitative research. And so I help organizations better understand their data by talking to people, understanding different aspects of their audience, but also doing some of the cool things that you can do when you're actually talking to people versus just building analytics on them, where we get to get ideas in front of them. We get to talk about their thoughts and feelings and really dig deep down to help make strategic decisions for your organization. And then for the name.
Yes.
So I gave myself a challenge when I was starting a business. I come from a design background, and I know I can spend forever coming up with a logo and a name and sort of the branding things behind it. So I gave myself 45 minutes to come up with something. And in that process, teenyBIG really rose to the top because I like the aspect of zooming in and out on a particular challenge, so we can understand things by really looking at the big picture and trend, but also, zooming in and understanding what individual people are, decisions people are making, and, detailed data points that can help us see the full picture rather than just coming in from where we usually view a challenge.
I love that. So it's like the micro macro, right? That play.
I'm always big on wait, let's look at another perspective
I love that. And I feel like you and I have some similarities in the way that we think. And that's probably why I was drawn to you when I heard you, I think on our friend Cindy's podcast. And I was like, ooh, she's talking about data, but she's talking about it in a very in a way that makes sense to me. And that's one of the things that right away, when I had to come up with my business name, Splendid Consulting, I gave myself, although I wasn't that disciplined, I was sunsetting and closing one company and opening up a new one. And I gave myself a week to make the decision on everything. So I gave myself 7 days. So, because the same thing, because we can go into decision fatigue on logos and names and fonts.
I'm an idea generator, and I have to give myself limitations to stop.
Yes. Awesome. I love that. All right. So we're going to dive into one of the things that you and I talked about when we initially met, which is you do come from the for-profit world like I do. And that's kind of what the lens you bring to nonprofits. Tell us about that.
Sure. So I spent a lot of my career in design research and product development in the for-profit world. So a lot in packaging. And the analogy that I like to bring to that is a package. You get a perfume bottle, a shampoo, a little mac and cheese, all that stuff. The package has to tell you what's inside. And I think we're packaging things all the time. And so I think it was just a good analogy. But we also, for-profit companies do a ton of research in order to understand why people buy things, in order to persuade them to buy things. And so I think there's a lot of those lessons I've been tweaking and working into the nonprofit world.
What comes up for you when you think about either those lessons or ooh, I wish that nonprofits would think of things this way or do this extra due diligence. What comes up for you as some low-hanging fruit?
I think this is low-hanging fruit, but the big nugget.
Yeah. Okay. Big, giant, ripe fruit.
Yeah. Giant fruit, the whole tree, is, in the for-profit world, they're always looking for the white space. What is the area, the uncharted area where people just need this candle in their home or, whatever is missing from their lives.
Yeah.
And, that to me doesn't feel good to bring a new product into somebody's life. But when we think of it in a nonprofit space, rather than using research to see what's been done before and what worked for these other things, to go out and talk to people and understand like what's missing from their lives. What can your nonprofit do to help, partner with them and sort of fill some of those emotional needs, but also, just like help them, everyone wants to be a better person. And I think really understanding how people are thinking about your particular nonprofit's issue can help you find that white space for stuff you haven't tried before. Maybe it's a new event, maybe it's a new campaign. And I think that sort of, campaign research or event research can really lead to some new ideas that break through.
Okay, so you said something really important, which is like you said something you haven't tried before. And one of the pieces that a lot of organizations get stuck in is we haven't tried this before, so maybe we shouldn't, maybe it will cost too much, maybe it won't go well, but this other thing we've been doing over here, we've been doing it, and maybe it's working okay, but at least it's cozy and safe, and I know what it's going to cost us, and let's just keep doing that. So talk about that. I don't know if that's a mindset piece or what would you say to that? Like sort of that dilemma.
In our world, like, especially, current world, like everyone is vying for attention. And so if you're going to do the same thing over and over, it's going to, it's not going to get as much attention. And I was kind of like, when I think about this, I think of the statistic that you're most likely to get into an accident within a mile of your home. And part of it's because you're seeing all the same things over and over again, and your brain just stops seeing them anymore.
Oh, that's
And so if we're doing the same type of event, if we're showing the same, talking about our challenges in the same way, they just kind of get, put into people's sort of like back burner of their mind. It's not that they don't care, but it's just they're like, oh yeah, that. And I've experienced that. And so if we're able to bring in new ideas, it just draws people's attention. We don't want to do new ideas just for the sake of them, but if you don't do new ideas, you're going to fall to that back burner.
Yeah, it's like I've heard somebody talk about like you don't think about going to pour a glass of water because you go pour a glass of water. I go to the fridge, I press the button, the water comes out. I'm doing that while I'm thinking about something else, right? But if I'm doing something for the first time, I'm very in it, or even the second or third time, it's like got my attention. And it is a little bit of organizations talking about their mission or talking about an upcoming fundraiser or something as if they're pouring a glass of water. They're using the same words. They're having the same event. They're swapping out like the date and the time, but that's about it. And from the donor, supporter, consumer point of view, that's going to be really hard to get our attention the 10th year, the 5th year, right?
And it's one thing if you have people on a monthly donor list and you don't really have, it's on the back burner mind, but people are still making those that support, then you can leave it in the back burner. But if you need to increase something, it's gotta, you gotta kind of refresh. You gotta be able to strike something in people's minds that's new and different.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about how you can use listening to gain new donors, because that's something that's really interesting to me, that you're like, I feel like a master listener. So talk to us about that and what that looks like. Like, what is listening, and walk us through that process.
Oh, sure. Okay. Well, we got a lot to unpack there. So, what listening is, just in like, there's a lot of different ways to go about it, depending on the scale of people you want to listen to, the type of people you want to listen to. But I'll talk specifically about new donors. Is that you mentioned that. And so, one of the things to look at is when I listen, is I try to focus in on who are you listening to. So sometimes people, might think about their audience in terms of generationally, older donors, younger donors. You might look at geographically, do you have sort of local people or people who are further out, or maybe it's through media channels and the way you're really marketing to people, or sending out mailers, or doing things in person. And so when you think about a new donor, like let's say it's younger donors. I know a lot of organizations, and I talked about this on Cindy's podcast, so like donors, their average donor age just keep going up one year every year.
Yep.
And so they need younger donors. And so what I would want to do is listen to like, what are your youngest donors? How have they connected with you? How did they get to first donate? And then maybe even go beyond that and find what I typically call the lurkers, the people that are maybe could potentially be those younger donors. Maybe they're people in a younger age range below your average, but they haven't donated. And so understanding them and why they care about your organization enough to lurk around.
How do you know they're a lurker? Like how do you know they're a lurker?
Well, I would say a lurker are people who are they are connected to your organization, but they haven't yet taken an action that you'd like them to take. So they might be on your email list, but haven't donated. They might be following your social media, but they haven't attended an event. It kind of is up to you to define that, but they have not committed to doing anything yet.
So I can hear like a million little or executive directors in my ear right now go, well, okay, yes, they exist. We've got lots of them on Instagram following us and lots of them on our email list. But like, what do I do? How do I get them to take action? How do I get them like from lurker to donor? What is that? It feels like, what is that jump?
Yeah, well, and it's understanding why they care and what they're doing so far. So, that's sort of why I like understand the people who have already taken the action. Let's say younger donors for you are, 25 to 40-year-olds. You can talk to those people within your donor group. Mm-hmm. They're already committed. They'll be willing to, a few of them will be willing to talk to you. And then also just, go out on social media and say, hey, can I, fill out this short survey? Would you be willing to talk to me for 15 minutes? And then you sort of start to understand, well, I guess then this is the more drawn out process of my work is like really trying to figure out the questions you need to understand why they haven't taken an action. So why do they care about the work that you do? How did they find out about you? Mm-hmm. Where else do they donate? Just to understand their behaviors for generosity. So the stories and motivations that attract them to your work. And so you can start to paint that kind of before and after picture and see some gaps of like, well, how can we get these people to do this action?
Do you find that it's like usually one or two kind of main themes on why they haven't, or does it depend on the organization? Like I'm thinking, it's like understanding who they are and their motivation, because they're in your world for a reason. Assuming they're opening your emails, assuming they're liking your social posts, but they haven't taken action. Okay, so the marketer in me goes, well, where's the friction? Like, is it too hard for them to make a donation? Are they clicking through too much and you've lost them? Do they not really understand the urgency? Is it messaging? Things like that. So does there tend to be a common reason, or what do you see through that? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of those types of things. So it might be, going back to sort of those new ideas. It might be that, the story that you're telling is just something they've maybe heard too much of. They've, it's been the neighborhood they've been driving around too often. So it might just be the fresh start. It can be accessibility. It can be the way you're describing the need. A lot of times I find, since we're talking about older and younger donors, generationally, people think about problems in different ways. And I know there's a lot of trends about, younger generations wanting to feel more a part of it, a part of the organization. So I think understanding how they see themselves playing a part of it, or even just giving how they can give feedback, can make them feel more close to an organization.
And have you found that to be true? Like that statistic, I feel like that data is there, that younger generations really want to be a part of something. Like they want to be a part of a community. They want to be part of social change in a way that's very different from an older generation and their why on why they give. So in your work, have you found that like, that seems to be true?
They're also the most, sought after for attention generation too. So you have to, you have to earn that, that attention or that relationship. But yeah, I think there's things like when I think back to projects I've done around younger generations, it's, it's language. Are you using strong enough language to connect with what they're thinking and feeling? Are you doing things in a different way that feels like, maybe if people build some skepticism over why things haven't changed in the past, are you addressing things in new ways? And then as far as involvement, a lot of people are more used to having a voice now. And so to be able to, even if it's just give feedback, that is involvement. So to be able to say, well, I work in the tech industry and I see these kind of things working in the for-profit world, to be able to give that feedback, even if it's not necessarily right for your organization, is a strong participation point for the younger generation. But there are, kind of like overarching themes in younger generations, but to also understand what's true for your specific audience is also helpful, because every sector is a little different. The way you attract people is a little different. And so you want to combine those two things with specifics, from your work.
I feel like that's overarching what I've heard from you that I really, really like, which is like, there is the data and there's also you being in the organization and having your own experience with your community and using that too as data, like to inform your next steps, to inform, right, what your next strategy is. Exactly. Okay. So I'm going to move on and let's talk about this idea of experience mapping and cultivation. Tell us what that is and why it's important.
So experience mapping is really thinking about people's overall experience with your organization. So like when I was talking about lurkers before, there's an initial awareness of what you do. They might decide to follow you and all that before they take an action. And then, there's sort of probably different levels within your organization where someone can go from, volunteering or making a donation to being more and more engaged in your work. When we think about that bigger or that first initial part, if you're just kind of treating everybody the same, you're kind of cultivating people and kind of hitting them in the right moment with the right information. And so I think, I give the analogy of like learning to play the guitar. A teacher is not going to just come in and give you like a big complicated, Van Halen riff to try to learn. First, you're going to like learn something simple, something exciting, and work and slowly build up those skills. And so in the same way, when you want to bring new people into your organization, having poppy statistics, having, kind of just really kind of catchy stories that might not feel like super in depth about your mission are just important just to grab people's attention. And once you can do that, then you can start to draw them in more and more to really understand the work that you're doing. And I'm not saying, to lie or fake anything, but you just want, there are things that are catchier about what you do and we'll start to bring people in.
100%. It's feeling like giving, especially the new people who are still really in that nurture phase, like at a glance. So somebody who isn't going to read everything that you send them, somebody isn't going to dive into that long story or that long form, whatever, to give them some at a glance of what your organization does, right? Some social proof that it works. I am always somebody who skims. So it's like, if I just skimmed your email or I skimmed something, what could I get out of it that I would be like, ooh, that's interesting. I want to come back for more. That's the piece that you're talking about with some of those newbies, right?
Yeah. I think of those like too long, don't read little snippets. Reading the things. It's like, what is that out of it? Because the first thing you need is to just get people to remember who you are.
And what about the people who they know who you are? They've been supporting you. What do they need? Like, what do they need in they've been in it. They've been in your world for years. Like, what is it that we can do better on that they're not already getting?
Yeah. And that's so as people move up that ladder, you don't just want them to stay static. It's like the more you can move up in engagement, the better. And so this is, again, where I think it's nuanced to the organization, but just to think it through, perhaps you have some regular donors, but you'd like them to increase the level that they're donating on an annual basis. That starts to get to be like helping them understand the need. And then, they might know more about your work, so you can go more in depth with them, that you can tell them the policy work that you're doing that takes a lot of time and a lot of effort, but is not for, the lurkers. They don't quite understand
the
enough.
Skimmers. Yeah.
And so, you could do more in-depth stories behind the scenes. I think being able to like give people a little video or some kind of more intimate information can help make them, one, understand the need better and why there's an increase. Like if they increase the donation, why it would help them. But it also gives them, as we're talking about younger generation, I think this is everybody, just to be able to, have a little bit of vulnerability. Bring them more closely, feel more close to your work.
So I love that you brought that up. That's something. So I taught this new email marketing course live earlier this year. And in that first cohort, a lot of what we talked about, we had a lot of EDs, but we also had kind of marketers and comms folks in there, was this idea of like really starting to weave in your own personality and your own point of view. And it's not all the highlight reel, and weaving that into your messaging and your email content. And a lot of organizations don't do that, right? Of like, it's not, they're not letting people know about the challenges, or everything's very, very high level and very like glossy and buttoned up. And so can you give us permission to be vulnerable, and from your lens, why is that important?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's just the, again, this is a trend, and not necessarily right for everybody, but, I think the more you can show how human you are, when we think about, I because I come from the for-profit world, I try to think of comparisons because, most of your donors are not in the nonprofit world. And so like, if they would invest in a Kickstarter or some sort of, entrepreneurial, you don't necessarily expect them to win all the time. Like there is sort of that challenge that they're up against as an entrepreneur, that, you're kind of buying into that process and like, how are they going to solve this problem? What are they going to do? Can they? And so I try to like think about that when it comes to nonprofits too, of, you are trying to solve a problem that no one can solve. That is why, that's why you exist. So if you knew exactly how to solve it, then you probably wouldn't be, the issue wouldn't be needed. And so to realize, to not only help people understand, but to also when you talk to people, think about that, what you're up against, and helping people buy into that challenge. What's some new way you're going to solve it, or how do you know or feel that like the way that you're solving this challenge is the best way? And what did you learn? What mistakes were made, and what did you learn along the way? That's sort of, again, when we talk for people feeling more a part of your organization, like getting them in that process, they don't necessarily have to be there, but to like help them understand that process, can just buy them into your methodology for meeting your mission.
And that's really, I feel like, what gives organizations an edge is when they tell the truth, right? When they talk about that, there's more than one most likely organization that does what you do, right? Mm-hmm. So if you talk about it in a really generic way, it's not really going to sound much different than everybody else. But when you talk about your journey or your personal experience or what's going on with your organization today, now you've got a little bit of an edge, and I'm identifying with that story, and I'm much more engaged than I might be if it was just more kind of generic.
Yeah.
Let's
lifestyle too. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So last year you gave this talk about prototyping and thoughtful courage. Tell us about that. And I want to dig into that.
Yeah. This whole conversation, I've been wanting to go over it because one of the things, I'm trying to empathize with the listeners as well, is like, well, how do you know what to do? You can talk to people, then what do you do with that information? How do you know how to move people along that engagement path? And so path. So one of those ways is through prototyping and testing. So this is something done a ton in the for-profit world, where you come up with you figure out what people might need. You bring some ideas of how that might come to life, models or pictures, and then you share those with people and get their feedback on them. And you can do the same in the nonprofit sector. So, let's say you're trying to turn those younger lurkers into donors. And, you talk to some people, you can see these differences between the younger donors and the younger lurkers. Well, you might not know exactly what it's going to take. So you can prototype ideas. You can, send different emails out. You can put some different campaigns together and show them to people. And I don't mean a whole campaign. I mean a headline and a paragraph, some photos, just something quick.
Yep.
I did my 45-minute brand name challenge. You could put together something quick and get them in front of people. And it allows you to have that courage of an entrepreneur, like trying something new without having to blast your whole email list with it. To you just see, how do people react? Do they understand it? Do they maybe think like, oh, that totally reminds me of this horrible thing that I experienced in my life. So don't go down that route. You can work out some of those mistakes thoughtfully, but still trying new things and moving in that direction where you're getting people's attention and getting them to take action.
So this is like a digital focus group. I'm thinking of kind of like that. Do they know they're a focus group? Are they like, does that make sense? Or is this like sending a small segment of your audience like a test for a campaign?
You could do all. Okay. So I'll just give a few examples of what it might look like. Like it could be as simple as, sort of like a small A/B email.
Yeah, totally.
2 different versions, send it out, see who.
I've done that as a marketer before. I'm like, I don't know what to call this workshop. Let's A/B test it.
Yeah. And so that's really straightforward. You get the real action people are taking and you can learn from that. You don't always know why, like what exactly it was. And you can't really like test complex things. You can sort of test like a little, a picture and a picture or a different.
That's right. That's a great tip, is don't make A completely different than B. Otherwise we didn't really A/B test, right?
Another way is I've done surveys where we put together 4 different ads for an organization. So it was just sort of like pulling out different marketing ideas. Like one was about the family that the organization was based on. One was more about the history and the neighborhood that the organization was in. And we just brought these to life with literally just, 7 words and a picture. Mm-hmm. And then through the survey, we're able to ask people questions about it. And another way might be that I've also done things where we just put together a pretend web page, and something really simple, like using use a Squarespace template and just put a button in a different spot and then show them to people and just watch them use it.
Yep.
How they go. So those are just a few different ways. There's hundreds of ways to prototype, but that's just ways you can start to see how people use things versus just asking them how they might feel about it. And then also observe them and see, what are maybe some unexpected things that you are seeing in their interaction with that new idea.
I feel like almost not no nonprofits do this. Like I'm thinking of the scene. I don't know if you watch Silicon Valley from HBO.
No, I
Like,
don't.
oh my gosh. So it's all about startups in Silicon Valley. And there's this, they kind of like refer back to it through many seasons, but there's this like focus group. So whether it's a new app or some sort of functionality piece, they're always bringing people back into the room. And it's, a group of people. And sometimes it's just young people. Sometimes it's different age groups. And then there's like kind of like the police station mirror. So there's the actual founders behind the mirror watching, and they're getting madder and madder and madder that the focus group isn't getting their amazing tech. But it's like, that is the data you need to know before you go put a bunch of money behind it, is where did people get stuck? Why don't they like the functionality? Or why do they love that little web page where you put the donate button over here, or that image really stuck with them? And I feel like I don't really see that happening too much. So I love, like, there's that is such a great idea that it's not about doing it in the most complex way. This is something really simple we could test, right? And we can ask for feedback for.
Yeah, I would say it's definitely new in the nonprofit world. I see it a little more in associations or healthcare, where I think they're used to getting feedback from organizations. But I think the thing I really like to push is, I've attended plenty of those, behind the mirror sessions in the past. And they add up. You're at a facility, you're talking to lots of people, you're giving them incentives, you're making a plan. And you can do that, but you can also just call people up and do it in an organized way.
That's right.
Have a list of questions, know what you're trying to figure out. And everything in between. And so it's really trying to right size your resources with what you want to learn.
That's right. So don't take what I just said and be like, Christina said, I need to find a focus group in person and have the mirror. And no, that is not what we're saying. Like, yes, do it with the resources and time you have. And there's a way that everybody could do this. And you just touched on my next question, which is, how do you know when you should survey a group versus interview a group? So you were just talking about, like, just call them up. And so what is that? Because you do both. And so talk to us about that process. And I'm somebody who I survey my audience quite a bit. And so I feel like I know the challenges and the benefits of surveys. So let's dig into that.
Yeah. Actually, I have some pieces on that I can send to your audience. Send for your audience as well, because it is a challenge. So surveys are really good if you want to reach a wider variety of people with a shallower amount of information. So, if you want to kind of, understand how they generally feel about something, preferences for things, I always love to have a few open-ended questions to talk about, past. Just things that you might not even know to ask. It's great to just have an open-ended area for venting, positive or negative. This helps you get those things that you don't know to ask. And so surveys can be really good for that. And then interviews are really helpful for understanding what you don't know. So, people are, so it might be really hard to do a survey about why aren't you donating? Because people just aren't thinking about it.
That's not a question people even ask themselves, right? So if you were to put that in a survey in some weird, they wouldn't know, right?
So we to donate more.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. So we need an interview to dig into the why behind that, right? To dig into the motivation, to dig into some of the objections. So keep going. Tell us.
Yeah. And I think with interviews, kind of another is you have to know who you want to interview. So if you, let's say you're trying to increase your donors, but you don't really know what kind of subset of people would like to focus on, a survey can help you figure some of that out. Okay. You can sort of put some determiners about age or location, and then you can sort of look at how different people answered. In an interview, you want to know, you don't just want to blanket interview 15 random people. You want to talk to people who fit the demographic or fit the criteria of what you're trying to learn about. So you can dive deeper into that segment.
So I'm going to give an example, like an organization I work with, they have a decent sized donor base that are either doctors or nurses because of what they do, right? Not all. So they could dig into that subset of nurses and get some data, because a question they might be answering is, okay, we've had this core group of doctors and nurses who work in the medical field, and maybe they work in the medical field in this location, right? How do we get more of them is my favorite question, right? Yeah. How do we get more of them? So is that something we could use an interview to help uncover?
Yeah. And so, I think a lot of times people feel like interviews, well, you're only talking to a few people. How do you really know that you're learning something about that whole group? And one of the statistics that come out of a lot of qualitative for-profit research is that if you can talk to 5 specific people, you can get 80% of the information you're looking for. And I think there's a lot of stipulations to that, but that doesn't mean 5 random people off the street. The more you can talk to, that subset of doctors and nurses, and maybe you need to separate nurses and doctors in that, depending on the topic. But if you talk to them, you can, it starts to level out of like how many people you talk to versus how much information you gather. And so, you'll learn a lot just from talking to 5 to 10 people within, that sort of tight segment.
And in that conversation, I'm thinking, like, I had 2 thoughts like at once. One was, okay, well, what are the best questions to ask them? And then my next thought was, maybe it's just more about listening and getting them to talk and just hearing about why they're involved in the organization to begin with. And maybe that's where, like, through the conversation, that is the data. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that's, I know people ask me a lot, like, what's the best questions to ask? And I do feel like, it's dependent on, you want to know, what do you want to learn first? Focus on that. But getting people to talk about their, when we talked about that engagement map, get them to talk about their own experience with those stages. How did they first hear about you? What got them to, stay engaged, but maybe not interact? What got them to sort of take that next level step? And you're going to start to learn a lot about that, why your organization matters to them. And then if you want to share them with them some new ideas, like, these are some things we were thinking about. I wouldn't take everything they say at face value, but just get like, does it make sense? Is it motivating for them? Do they have questions? And then, you will learn, you'll start to find patterns in those people's experiences and how they comprehend new ideas.
Yeah, I love that. I want to give people permission to, number one, like, have these interviews, do it imperfectly and do it from a curiosity place versus like have to know the right questions so I can get the right thing from them. So then I can find more people like them versus, like you just said, of like, find out what their own donor journey was like, or their own experience map was like, and then just have a conversation and then invite them into maybe what you're working on or what you're thinking about. And if you do that 5 times, I'm totally with you. You're going to have some really excellent data on next steps. And you're also going to have 5 really beautiful conversations of newly stewarded, donors in a way that they hadn't been before. So they're going to feel more connected to you too.
Yeah. And I think there's definitely some watch outs of, like, you don't want to let one person's strong opinion overshadow. You really want to look for patterns.
Yes.
Sort of take out some of those extremes, but at the very, very, very least, what you want is expand your bubble. Like all of us work in close organizations that can talk to each other, and if you can't sort of see outside of that and how different groups of people may comprehend or understand your work, you're not necessarily going to know how to reach them.
So I want to jump back to surveys for a second. And number one is there any way to incentivize that? This is total, what's it called question. It's going to serve me to incentivize self-serving question. how to get people to fill out surveys. So here's kind of my survey framework is I try and keep the number of questions short so that I'm not like giving them, 20 questions. I try and give them like 5 questions within a room to speak their mind to with that piece. But is there any way to get more people to fill out surveys?
Yeah, it's so funny. I just listened to a really great podcast, Adam Grant, on incentives.
I love Adam Grant. Okay.
And it was really because, they talked about, incentives and how there's sort of like, there's sometimes like social pressure incentives. There's wanting to be a good person.
Yep.
But then there's also like, oh, I get an Amazon gift card.
Yep.
Sure.
Yep.
I'll get, something I've been wanting. And that sometimes when they combine the two, it actually decreased.
Okay.
So if you really want to get into it, like I guess the real trick is there's no way of knowing exactly what will perfectly incentivize people. And so you could test it out if you really, usually when I do surveys, that's sort of a big ask to test out an incentive beforehand. And so I really just believe in like, having at least some kind of, monetary incentive that is not going to influence the results.
Good point.
That will like grab people's attention. So, if you do surveys all the time and you offer $100 gift card and you really want this survey to stand out, maybe it needs to be a little bit more. But then I also believe in just getting people's attention. So, at least 3 reminders for a survey.
Thank you. Okay. I was like reminders, but you just added an extra reminder. So that's amazing that you said 3. So like everyone, she said 3 reminders. That means 3. Yeah. I've told a story before. It took 10 reminders for me to order photos for my daughter's like preschool. 10. Yeah. It was like email, text. And finally the 10th one, I was like, I got to order this photos.
Yeah. Think of the thing that like is like the bottom of your to-do list.
Yep.
What it would take to take action on that. And that is what you need to do because,
my to-do list.
Exactly. Write down there, take a survey.
Yes.
And so, and not just reminders, like why is it important? Like, why do we need your feedback? Kind of what's in it for you, even if it's just to make the world a better place. So those kind of things I feel like are super important to get people to fill the survey because, first they have to open up the reminder. And then once it's open, they got to click on the survey. And so, you really got to try a few different angles. I know there's sometimes where I just don't see things like, oh yeah, another survey. But if you can get, try a few different headlines so it doesn't seem like you're just, asking the same question over and over.
Yeah. And it's like, no one wants to fill out a survey, but they do want to give you their input on this thing that they care about too. So it's even just the way you package and position the actual survey itself so that they feel like, they're either a part of something or that they're helping you or right. So it's not just the call to action, fill out the survey. We can probably do better than that too.
Yeah. And I will say the other thing that can help, and this is sort of the long-term view is giving people feedback. So if people fill out your survey and they never hear from you again, they're going to think twice about the second survey. I wish I had some like great statistics on this, but I think all of us can relate to it. But when you hear, okay, these are some top line things we heard, this action, we're going to look into this because of this survey. Now you feel like, all right, I actually did something, like I made a difference. And when you get asked to fill out a survey again, it's going to be a lot more exciting.
This is no different. I call this like closing the story loop. So if you have a fundraiser for 50K and then you never tell us, like, what did you do it? What happened? Like if it was in a container of time, the campaign ends, close the loop. What happened? Tell me, and it's the same thing, especially for surveys too. Yeah. If somebody went through the trouble of filling it out and sharing their input. Like they don't want it to just go off into the universe, having never heard back. We are now engaged. They went through it. So like close the loop and tell us what happened, or tell us what's next, or just a little tidbit from it. I think that's such a good piece. And I bet that when you do that, they're so much more compelled to do it again. Right. It's just,
yeah. It's just it's a building trust.
Yeah. All right. This has been such a great conversation. So before I ask you our final question, I'd love to know anything else that you would love our listeners to know, or something that you're working on next.
Oh, that's a good one. Well, I love to connect with people on LinkedIn, because that's where I'm just always putting all my ideas, testing my own things to see what's on people's minds, and learn and go back, have some interaction. And yeah, I'm trying to think of what else. I don't know. I'm kind of just like in a good.
Your LinkedIn is rocking and rolling, I gotta say. You've got a good LinkedIn game. We're gonna link to that for sure in the show notes. So go hang out with her on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And go ahead.
Well, and I've really been focusing on helping helping organizations that have been maybe feeling a little loose and unguided over the pandemic, to use listening as a way to help, reset who they are and where they focus. It was a pre-strategic planning, but then also that kind of younger audience, and really understanding some new spaces that organizations can go into.
I love that. That is one of the number one talked about, like wants, problems, needs, is like cultivating that younger donor base. So I think it can just feel overwhelming, but if you start by just doing this listening, doing some surveying, doing some interviewing, I think that will help inform the next step. And it's just like one piece at a time, one step at a time, and start with this.
Yeah. If you're doing nothing, you're not learning anything. And so
there you go.
You gotta start somewhere. It doesn't need be a big, huge research plan. You just need to start learning about that group.
Love that. So last question we ask every guest on this podcast is what is one thought you like to think on purpose? And I like to think of this as, it may be something that is an affirmation, a mantra, just something that you believe, but what's a guiding thought for you in your life?
Let me see. I have all these Post-it notes around, so I'm trying to figure out
good. Yes.
Which one is the right one to talk about? I think this idea of creativity. So I have posted across for me my mantra for this year, which is creative confidence. And I think sometimes in the nonprofit space, we think about creativity as like, not a best practice, not something tried and true or trustworthy, but like to think creative is like what makes us humans and helps us connect with people. And so to be able to just have some confidence in like the unknown and some new ideas, and using, the stuff that I've been talking about, or we've been talking about this whole session, of like, how do you then prove out some of those ideas? But I think there's like that idea that like, if we're not creative, we're just not humans. And so like, let's figure out how to bring more of that to just make things special, make things connected, and, just to use it to solve problems.
I love that. Yeah. Let's stand out. Let's not just do the same old thing. So that's beautiful. Thank you so much for today.
Yeah, thank you. I really enjoyed this conversation.
If you ask me, everyone should have a coach, especially you. I want to invite you to schedule a free discovery call with me. Go to splendidatl.com/contact. You'll see my calendar there. Book a call with me. You'll learn about my smart growth method, where we can grow your business or organization sustainably with ease and massive impact. Think you've reached out to everyone in your network? Are you out of ideas to get noticed and get funded? I hear you. That's why I'm giving you a chance to steal my prospect list. Yes, you can generate leads for your nonprofit or impact-driven business. Grab my mini training and list delivered to your inbox instantly. Go to splendidcourses.com/prospect.